So everyone, thanks for joining. We've got an incredible guest today. He's an Academy Award nominated writer and director. He's had an amazing career so far and will continue to, hopefully, putting out some great work. Some highlights include Michael Clayton, which had 7 Academy Award nominations, including Best Screenplay and Best Director. It actually won Tilda Swinton her Best Supporting Actress Oscar. Tony's also written the first 4 Bourne films and also directed the 4th installment. Some of his other credits include Rogue One, Dolores Claiborne. He's also produced a critically acclaimed Nightcrawler, has worked on House of Cards. I could keep on going on and on with this list, but I'm not going to spend all night here with the 20, 30, 40 years of work that you've done, Tony. But want to start off by saying thank you so much for doing this. I mean, this really means a lot to our group, and I'm so glad to have you here.
Well, good timing and persistence. That's good.
Thanks.
The timing was good and their persistence was good. So here we go.
Thanks. So just a reminder for everyone, we're going to have a conversation for about 40-45 minutes. In the last 10-15 minutes, we will start opening up cameras and mics for everyone to ask, or for you to ask Tony a question of yours directly. So I'm just going to jump right into it, Tony. As I had said, a lot of our audience today are writers and directors.
Right.
I kind of want to start with process. And I know, by the way, I want to preface this by saying, if anyone hasn't watched Tony's BAFTA lecture, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing insight to Tony's process, to how he deals with working on original screenplays. But one of the things you sort of talk in there is about your process of outlining. And it seems like you're a big fan of outlining. I've heard online and in other conversations, you talk about outlining. One of the questions I sort of have for you that kind of comes up often in our group is, how do you sort of deal with, writer's block, if you'd like to call it, when you get stuck writing that process? And I know you talk about the drop, and maybe we can talk about that too, but how do you deal with sort of getting stuck on what you're writing?
There's all varieties of getting stuck. There's all kinds of different ways of getting. I mean, there's stuck if you don't have the big idea of what it is you're supposed to be working on. But the more typical example is that you've kind of figured out what you're doing. I mean, what I'm doing right now, I'm rewriting some scripts for this television, for this show that we're doing. And even though I know what the whole thing is about, and I even really know what it is. In fact, in some cases, I'm rewriting stuff that's there before. I still get stuck, and it's the typical way of getting stuck. And the reason I get stuck is always now what I realize. It's because I don't have the cut.
Yeah.
I need the cut, and I need. What do I need? I'm getting hung up on I don't own the environment that I'm moving to.
Yeah.
I have it. I've imaginatively, abstractly built some version of it that's good enough to move on and build the story, but not good enough for me to get in there when I finally get in the scene and go, oh my God, I really haven't been at the campsite before. I've never been to this library before. I've never been in this thing before. It's a new environment, and I don't really own it, strangely. And that stalls me out. I get very stalled out on action sequences now. I've done so many of them, and then you get a reputation for doing them, and then people want you to do them more, and then you learn how to do them, and they have great value. They have really great value. I'm getting an echo now all of a sudden.
Oh, I think we're good now.
Okay, but they require so much energy, and it's the climbing in. It's the imaginative climbing in visually for me in my imagination. That's the stall. That's what the writer's block is. It's screenwriting. I think it's the blockage of the visual, the immersive visual component, and the complete ownership. That's become such a fucking term, but ownership of the moment. And it's always shocking. I can spend 2 or 3 days circling something. I just had to do a scene that was very complicated last week. Very complicated scene with a whole bunch of people in it, and lots of crosstalk and much action, and the tempo of it and the pace of it has to be absolutely perfect on the page to have it read like the way you want it to go. And the mechanical climb into that was lengthy.
Yeah, yeah. So actually talking about that mechanical climb, you talked about sort of creating worlds and understanding space, and a lot of your films have to do with space, whether it's Bourne and walking through buildings and all those action sequences, or obviously Rogue One, you're creating a whole new world. Could you, I know it's kind of a very top level question, but is it possible to walk through sort of the idea of creating a world? Where do you start? How do you sort of start that architecture of creating it?
Well, that makes it sound incomprehensible and difficult and hard. I'll tell you something that's actually, I think everything for me goes small to big, and you'll see in all the interviews I do, everything I talk about, I always start with stuff that's really small and build out. Now that's not entirely true. I will think, oh, this is what the big idea of this thing is about. But the thing I'm working on now has so many props, and I find myself, my immersion, I know when I'm really in it, when the scene becomes about some object or some piece of the set or something very, very specific, when I'm so far in, and because you just think about how your life is and you think about how things really are, and the mundane specificity of the world that you're in and the objects that are there. And there's often such an entry point into a really great scene through the smallest things. I know that's not a direct answer to your question. I know you weren't looking for building out from, but I really build. I know when I'm really in it, when, oh my God, look, you know what? The last scene was this guy sitting on his bed, and the next scene is his gun that's been stolen by the guy he's chasing, and the gun is on the riverbank. Oh my God, that's really great for me. And I didn't have the gun there before. And that really, and I may have circled that scene for hours or a day or 2 days or come back to it. And like, oh my God, now all of a sudden I wake up in the morning and I go, oh, you know what? Wow, I can have Cyril's gun right there on the thing. And that brings me back. And of course that ties it in. And then maybe it's just an excuse to buy my way into the scene, but it is how I get entry. There's so many, you're always looking for just some sort of key that gets you into the scene, because that is the bulk of what we do, is scene writing.
Right.
The bulk of the job. Yep.
Yeah. So something else I want to talk about is what I found interesting within your work is a lot of the time you're writing about the people behind the people, right? So Michael Clayton is a fixer who fixes up everyone's mess, or Bourne is an assassin who's designed to stay under the radar. Right. And often these films have something to say, right? They're talking about society or the power struggle. So I guess my question to you is, do you know at the beginning of the process of your writing of what you're trying to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, before you can start the script, you better know what you're trying to say. I don't know how to do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how to. I'm not so vainglorious that I would ever tiptoe into a script without knowing what it is I was really about. By the time I even really get to an outline, I've figured out what I think the movie is about. It's very important for me to be able to know that. I don't subscribe to the theory that you should be able to say what your movie's about to yourself, or in the bar to your friend, or on a talk show when you're selling it or something. At the end, you should really know what your movie's about, I think.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think what we often find ourselves, especially in our workshops, is I think people are still they perhaps know what it's about, but during that process, and I think this goes back to the drop of, how do you know when it drops what it is, and how do you recognize that you are owning that drop? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that I know you've talked to me before about this. You fixated on that term. I mean, that it feels like my brother and I, when we talk about scripts, and it doesn't know there's scripts that work that don't absolutely fall into this category, but you're trying all the time to have a script that feels natural. like something that's, you know, A440, it's in perfect pitch, it's in tune. It's like, oh wow, that just, and sometimes it's something really, you know, and I've had these experiences where I can literally remember, you know, when the movie came. And I mean, Born Legacy for me was something that was eluding me tremendously. I had all kinds of sexy material and all kinds of stuff that was around it that was really interesting to people, but I didn't have what the movie was about. And I literally can remember, you know, being at, you know, at my mother's house for the summer, and like the morning where I sort of was sitting there going like, oh, the guy had transcendence and intelligence, and if he doesn't take these pills, he's going to lose it. It's not about gaining superpowers. It's about being offered transcendence and intelligence and enlightenment. And the risk of having that light extinguished is the, for better word, a ticking clock of the movie. Mm-hmm. That's and it's like, oh my God, well, that's a fucking movie. Yeah. That's like, okay. Everything else from that point on, from the moment you have that idea, everything else is filling in the blanks. It's just like, well, how good am I going to do all the interstitial material that comes between that? But that story, oh, yeah, that's pretty natural. That's a pretty natural, gripping, and somewhat unique, and yet Greek at the same time. You know, that's the other term. I mean, is it Greek? Is it mythic? Is it fundamental? Is it an elemental thing? And it's not like you start off going like, oh, I'm gonna open Joseph Campbell's, hero's journey, and I'm gonna find my story. It should be the opposite. You should like get your story, and then you should go, oh my God, this stupid little thing I was working on actually is a hero's journey. It should be the other way around. It should be, you should wake up to how big the idea is as opposed to like waking up to how small it is. I don't know.
No, yeah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense.
That's my, you know, people douse, you know, when they look for water, where they would take a stick. And I mean, that's how I think that's my prospecting process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit, talking about sort of the projects that you've come on sort of late in the game. You know, you sort of have become the savior of several, you know, films, whether it's Rogue One, House of Cards.
Well, I didn't save House of Cards. Now you're getting in a lot of trouble. I came on House of Cards as a literally as a in the coolest, kookiest job ever. No, I was just there to kibitz on that show and to be a nagging voice, of a final nagging voice for Bo, who was very much in charge. I was not taking that show over at all.
Fair enough. I guess what I was trying to get to though is when you're reading that script, when you're reading Rogue One or whatever it is, and it's late in the game, are there particular holes you're looking for of where the finessing may need to happen?
What happens? Well, it depends on whether you're looking at a movie. You know, a lot of times if they're really in trouble, it's really late. You're looking at a cut of a film. You're watching the cut.
Yeah.
You know, and what do? If I'm watching a cut, or if I'm reading a script of something that's really in trouble or something that's about to start shooting, I read it pretty quickly. I try to read it once for just to see how it affects me. I'm usually extremely brutal and weirdly more generous in some way in that first read. There's a lot of things I miss, but I'm usually pretty, like, what's wrong with it is usually very clear. And then if I'm really going to work on it, I then really go through and I do my own continuity. I'll go through and I'll be like, I'll literally, you know, I could get a continuity from the company or whatever, or they have one. But I sort of go through and do my own continuity, so I understand every single scene that's gone through. I sort of write the whole thing back up again. And at that point, I usually begin to see everything that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, and then it becomes, you know, then
is there something in particular that you found common that is wrong amongst scripts that you read? A common issue that you see through while reading through these scripts?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think bad screenwriting or failed screenwriting is when it doesn't just really, that people haven't really done the very hard work of say what would really happen next. It's so fucking simple. What would really happen next? It's very, and I'll be honest, I think maybe in the first 10 years of my career, 8 years of it, I'm not sure I really paid attention to the rigor that was involved in that. I'm not, maybe even longer than that. But it's a rigor that I now know. I'm old and my energy is not the same, but my efficiency is way the fuck up because I know how to do this one thing, which is that I'll just go through and do the really hard work in the beginning, which is what would I do? What would she do? Right? You become the people in the movie and you look at the movie from their point of view and you realize, my God, they would never do that. And you watch characters in a bad script and their IQ will go up and down based on the interest of the writer for that scene. Oh, the writer needs this thing to happen, so the character is really smart. And then they get really stupid. And then you find out all the way through, and particularly in the kind of movies that you get called on to fix, are more often than not, they're not small personal interrelationship films that have lots of, enigmatic layers. And they're things that have lots of mechanical aspects to them. Well, who knows what? Well, fuck, man, on this scene, why wouldn't she know that he went to the bank before they went to the hotel? And why didn't somebody ask that question? You really have to, it's so much of it is just being super rigorous and not lazy and being so experienced, probably the pain of not, you know how painful it's going to be if you don't do that work. And you're never really going to solve the problem if you don't. It's like painting a house. You look at some gigantic Victorian peeling painted house and it's like, oh my God, well, we could just frickin' paint the house.
Right.
But you can't. You got to go scrape the entire house and you got to prep the entire house and you got to fix all the cracks and you got to get in and you got to get every piece of, and you got to go do all the ugly, stupid work beforehand. And when that's done, you can paint the house and then it'll be good. But if you just paint the house, which is what a lot of bad screenwriting is.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess talking about, the houses, you've written or you've built a lot of different houses, right? So you've one of your first writing credits is Cutting Edge. It's a rom-com. You've written dramas. You've written actions. I didn't even realize that you were a writer on Armageddon. So I guess considering that you've worked across various genres, how does your process change from one place to the next?
Oh, the process? No, I think your tone and you try to get on the vibe of what the thing is. You don't want to bring the wrong lens. But you know what? That's even not true. I think you treat everything exactly the same, really, in the end. I don't really treat any of them any differently. I bring the same process to whatever it is. I think there's levels of tone. If you're working on something that's really poppy and light and wants to have some empty calories and have some icing and candy color to it, you don't want to dig too deep. But the process is the same. And what I said before, I haven't said that a lot before, and it probably sounds really mechanical to people, but it's really freaking true. It's the same process. It's digging back into the details of where are we really and what would be really happening and what would really happen. And there's just so much good everything that comes out of specificity. All of a sudden you're there, the characters take over, something real is really happening. No, it's always the same process, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I want to talk to you next about sort of directing and pacing, right? I think Michael Clayton is a great example of this. There's this intense feeling throughout the whole film of the calm before the storm. And then we get to that end point, that great scene with George and Tilda. I guess what I wanted to ask is, when you're on set and you're directing something that you've written, how do you communicate that voice in your head that you wrote to those actors? I mean, to me, that last scene, it's very important to get that pacing down and the sense of intensity. How do you communicate that to them?
Well, I mean, look, you put it on the page, the closer it is on the page, the better it is. And the better the actor, the more they really appreciate that it's on the page. If you really suggested a tempo, I'm a freak on the page and in the final work and everything. I'm a freak for tempo and dynamics. I really, um, I waste an incredible amount of time building tempo on the page with stage directions and punctuation and stuff, just to make sure that it really feels. Way too much time. Way too much of my life has been spent, articulating those things. But you can really give a even if it's some polyrhythmic, crazy frickin' tempo that you want, you can really give it to the actress if it's really on the page, and they pick up on it. And then when you're on set, you want life. I mean, more than anything, you don't want your script to show up. You want life to show up. I mean, you're so desperate to have real life appear.
Right.
You're hoping that you lit a pilot light and the material's there and it starts to take off. And if you only get close, then you go in with John Gilroy in the cutting room and you build it. You build it and go back then.
Yeah. I mean, what it sounds like a lot that you're talking about, especially with life, is, human behavior and recognizing that natural human behavior that could be happening in front of you.
I become more, I mean, you'll hear in everything that I've said in the past, like 8, 10, I don't know how, whatever it is. That's really the word that probably pops up more than anything else for me, which is behavior. I now realize that this is entirely a gig about behavior. Because all we're, I don't know how many, I would not want to know how many characters I've been involved with in my whole life, but they really have. It sounds really fucking corny, but they all have, like, if I paid attention to them, they've all had some unique identity. And, within that unique identity, you want them to have a behavior, and you want to know as much about behavior as you possibly can so that you can address them.
Yeah. So I want to take a step back, and I wanted to talk about setups and payoffs. Do you know beforehand or while writing, I guess, how do you know during the process where your setup and payoff is coming? Does that come to you as you're writing? Does it come to you before you're writing? You sit down, where you're going with it?
I think it's probably troublesome. Would I say that I ever really set it up beforehand and go, oh, wow, this is a great setup for a payoff? I'll tell you, the best payoffs are the ones that you didn't. I trust myself enough that I'm going to lay enough interesting things in my outline in the beginning, in the pipe, whatever, that I'm going to go, when I get 15, 20 pages, oh, look, I can pick this. Here's a little basket I left for myself. I'll tell you an example. There's a movie I wrote, really, a script I loved, but not a shitty movie. The script I wish I could have back more than anything else to have made was a movie called Extreme Measures, which was supposed to be an adaptation. It wasn't. It was an original script. And it's a really, really, I love the script, and I really had a lot of fun doing it. But in it, there's a character who I wrote the first half, and she's a nurse for this doctor, and it's this whole medical thriller conspiracy thing. And she was on his side, and she was going to be the one who helped him and was on his side. And at a certain point, I was like, oh my God, I need a villain, and I built these really cool architecture for the villains. And all of a sudden, I got to the point and was like, oh my God, her brother is one of these people. And like, he goes to her, and I was like, because it's one of the first times I can remember, because I had written so committedly into her being a different way, that when I got to turn her, she just turned on a dime, and it was really shocking and really fun. And those are the ones that, and I guess sometimes I probably know, oh yeah, I'm gonna put breadcrumbs here along the way and pick this up later on. But the best ones are when you just sort of intuitively go along, and you've put enough ornaments on the tree that you have them there waiting for you later on. It's more fun when it's not something that you really worked out.
Yeah. I guess a question, follow up to that though, is how informed, so once you have it on the page and you're directing, how informed are your actors of the details of the elements of the world around them and what they're like? When you write your stage directions out, are they as detailed as having every single piece of?
Well, you see them. They're in the scripts. I don't write any more than what's in the scripts. I mean, I mean, by the time, I mean, you're talking about what, how to deal with that. I mean, my attitude with actors is my sort of style is that I like to give them anything that they want, any conceivable resource, and I don't hide any information from anybody when I'm directing on my set and my crew or anything. I worked for a lot of. I had the distinct advantage of having worked for a lot of directors before I became a director, and I got to see a lot of things that I liked and a lot of things that I didn't like. And one of the things I didn't like from some of the directors I worked with was that they were very withholding with information. They were afraid that if everybody knew everything, that they would be neutered in some way or diminished in some way. I believe in sharing all of the film with anybody particularly with department heads and actors. Everybody should know everything about everything that we're doing. So there's no limitation on that. And actors should have every resource they want. If they want to go out and buy funny shoes and they want to get the right glasses and the one thing I don't want to do is I really don't want to rehearse with them. I don't want that.
And why is that?
I want people to show up prepared to go to work. I'm hiring people because I know that they can do that. And I like to see things happen for the first time on camera. And I like the tension of it. There's been times, there are some things that really do need to be rehearsed. If you have like the scene I described that I was working on the other day that has 6-8 people in it, and it's this, that's the kind of scene you'd really have to work on, or if there's something physical in it that really has to be worked on. But by and large, I would prefer not to rehearse the scene. I'd rather see it come up on the floor that morning for the master rehearsal. But with actors that I know are showing up and on book and know their work and know that I'm expecting them to be there and were cast for that purpose and have been given every resource, any conversation that they wanted to have with me about it along the way they've had. I just don't want to see them frickin' rehearse it. And other people have other techniques, and there's brilliant. I mean, this is just, if you had Sidney Lumet here, you'd be like, oh my God, well, who knows more? Sidney Lumet knows more. He loved to rehearse. People love to rehearse. But table reads and rehearsals, I was party to 20 years of them, and I just watched a lot of performances get left behind. You'd see something happen for the first time at the table or in the trailer or in the rehearsal or in the audition, and you'd be like, where the fuck was that? It didn't come back. Wait a minute, So, yeah. And I like things to be brisk. So I don't like people to mess around, and I really like to set a tempo. Like when we go to work, like show up and bring your work. I don't want to stand around and like talk about everything all day long while we're doing it. Now it's time to go to work. And I think sometimes directors who rehearse a lot, the conversation never stops.
Yeah. Actually, someone just wrote in a pretty interesting question. When structuring your oneers, long takes, you tend to keep your shots to 3 beats. So the example that they're giving is the end of Michael Clayton. The hey, stop him. The police walk past him. Clayton gives the phone off. How did you go about planning these beats? And I mean, this sounds like something that probably John came up with in the edit room.
No, those would have been staging things. No, the oneers take him off the hook. I mean, the oneers is like
I'm at the
best cut scene, and Michael Clayton is the murder.
Yeah,
obviously, John Gilroy knows that.
Yeah, so I guess the question is like,
I never think of it in terms of 3. I don't know if it's in terms of 3. I'd have to go back and think of all the ones that the ones that we did. I never thought of it in terms of 3. I mean, it depends on a couple things. It depends on what kind of resources you have. On Clayton, we had Scott Sakamoto, and we had a camera operator and Bob Ellswood, and we had some sets that really lent themselves to doing some really cool things. And we had, I had years to plan that movie, and you can go too far. I mean, look, Children of Men is, to me, probably the strongest visual film of the last, I don't know, is it 20 years now? It's probably falling out. 15 years anyway. I mean, Children of Men. So I'm a freak for it. I love it. There's times where you see people do it and it's like, it's utterly self-conscious, and then there's films where, like, I don't know if anyone's seen Irreversible. I would never recommend anybody to see that, but that film just like,
yeah.
I don't know. What did you think of 1917? Did you love 1917, or did it take you out of it? It took me out of it that it was all a oneer.
Yeah, it sort of took me out of it. I think it kind of took me out of it also just because
Yeah.
I sort of knew it was coming at me.
It was showy. It was showy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Looking ahead, what are your thoughts on films post-COVID? Are any major concerns or even advice for some of our actors of maybe, what sort of approach you may be taking?
You mean to COVID shooting?
To COVID shooting, to COVID writing. I mean,
well, gosh, man, well, all right, that's an interesting. COVID shooting. Anybody who tells you they know what they're doing, I think, is lying. I mean, we're struggling. I mean, I couldn't even begin to tell you how much everybody's struggling to try to figure out how to do this, and how much energy is going in to try to figure out how to do this. And I know there was an article in the Times the other day, and they're shooting in Iceland. They're shooting Children of Corn in Australia, with a lot small, super micro productions. If you're opening a diner kind of movie, there's going to be all kinds of strategies where you lock down the crew and location and do different things and whatever. Those things will work immediately. Big time filmmaking, I don't freaking know. I mean, it was hard enough to make big time films before. It was hard to do them before, and the bar keeps being raised of what's expected. So very, very difficult. And I don't think anybody really knows how that's going to work. And it's all going to have to work without insurance. So every project's going to have to be self-insured. So that's going to be a financial ledge that I don't think a lot of independent films above a certain level are going to be able to take. I mean, stupid money, it might come in and pay for your movie, but it's not going to come in, and because you have to think of an actor comes in and they have a fever from something else, and you take their temperature, and now you have to shut down for 2 days because they have a fever from food poisoning or some other damn thing. Now you're shut down for 2 days, and you just lost 2 days that are uninsurable. So when those answers figure out, the writing thing is interesting. I'm working on Star Wars now, so I don't have to worry about anything contemporaneous. I was working on Clayton when 9/11 happened, and it set me back for the better part of a year. I couldn't really work on it. It was, how do I incorporate this event into my consciousnh and into my project? I was dealing with a contemporary. I don't know if I had a contemporary project right now, how I would incorporate all this into what I was doing. I think there'll be I would be fleeing towards period and fantasy and other kinds of things right now. Yeah. Very tough, very tough. I was in that. I haven't even thought really that much about how beatifically exempt I am from that problem. But I really was in that problem. When 9/11 happened, it just crushed me on Clayton. I was just like, I don't know how to swallow this. What do my characters do? Oh my God, this happened. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. I mean, I was just talking to another filmmaker friend who, has a film that takes place essentially in one place, but there's a lot of intimate scenes, and we were trying to discuss, how do you ensure even intimate scenes now? I mean, how do you do any of that? It's going to be really interesting.
But how do you incorporate in the reality of what's happened? Are you going to have I mean, if society is going to be altered in some fundamental way, which is pretty clear, this is a pretty, we're living in a moment of history. How are you going to incorporate that idea into your script? Are people going to talk about it? Are they going to reference it? Am I going to ignore it? Is it going to be before that happened? Are we so post that we're out of it? Do we reference that? Those are questions that when you're vulnerable anyway, because you're working on your idea and everything's vulnerable, you have no skin, is very, very difficult to tackle that. Yeah. I'm happy I'm not doing that today. Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to some screenwriting stuff, Chris has interesting questions. Do you abide by or have any sort of quote unquote principles of writing dialogue?
What do you mean? I ask him what he means by principles. I don't know. No, I don't have any principles. No, it should read like people talk.
Yeah, I guess another way to put it is, I guess this goes back to human behavior. And do you sort of distinguish qualities of your characters' behaviors in order to determine their sense of dialogue? I don't know if that helps.
I would say that each of your characters should be so incredibly alive and specific to you that when they speak, when you get it wrong the first time, for the next 2 days as you're going over that scene, all you're doing is getting it right to get it to come out of that person's mouth perfectly, because you know them so well and you know what they have to sound like. I don't know. They all have their own, some characters have different punctuation in their dialogue than other characters. They're all, it should just be dead on that person. It should be inevitable that that's what they have to say.
Yeah. So we're about 20 minutes out. Before I open it up, so Tony, we kind of do this rapid round, rapid fire. I don't know what you want to call it. I'm going to ask you a series of 5 questions, whatever comes to your mind.
Oh no.
Some of them are easy. Don't worry. So the first one is one book you'd recommend to a filmmaker.
One book I'd recommend to a filmmaker. Outer Bridge Reach. There's right there. Robert Stone's Outer Bridge Reach.
Outer Bridge Reach. Okay. One film you find yourself going back to for inspiration.
Tropic Thunder.
Oh, interesting. One film you wish you wrote or directed.
Oh my God, that's easy. Birdman. Birdman is the movie I feel like I made that I didn't make. Birdman.
Really?
My wife and daughter are upstairs. They could hear me right now. They would be, yes. Birdman.
It's interesting. It's another oneer. You didn't really love 1917. So it's interesting that you felt so compelled by Birdman.
I'm going to do an essay at some point about Birdman. I shouldn't do it here. I've had such powerful feelings about Birdman.
Oh, you should do it here. Tell us. At least give us a gist.
No, I saw it when I saw Birdman the first time. I've seen it about like 12 times. When I saw it, I was like, I loved it so much that I felt I was like, I couldn't believe that I didn't make it. I was like, why didn't I write this? I thought I wrote this, and how did these South American Mexican motherfuckers make this movie? This is my movie. I have such ownership of it. To own something that you have nothing to do with is so insane and so crazy. Every time I see it, I'm just like, oh, I made this movie. That's how much I identify with it. It freaks me out. It's my childhood, the back of Broadway houses. I can't believe that those guys, Raymond Carver, all these things that are important to me are in that movie. Anyway.
Yeah. Totally. The next question is, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh, God. Direct sooner.
Interesting. And then the last one is sort of a nod to our application process. We tend to have at least one fun question in there. So the one that I'm doing for you is, what type of food would you be and why?
What type of food would I be?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd be a big, thick Hungarian stew.
Why?
It'd be very layers of stuff, and it'd been on the stove for a very long time, and lots of flavors, and just a big mess, but really good late at night, I guess, when you're drunk. I don't know.
Awesome. I think we're going to start opening it up to some of the folks here. Vishesh, Lapika, I forget who's doing it, so my apologies. But I guess we could start with Jay. Do we have Jay there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so how many drafts? Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Dave, hope everything's great. I love your work, obviously. How many drafts of the outline, and then how many drafts of the script? All right, start my video.
Well, that's changed. That's changed a lot over the years. Like, I really have become, now I know, now I'm old, and, you substitute wisdom for energy, as time goes on, and hopefully you become a sniper and not, you get very, very accurate. It depends on whether I have to present an outline or whether it's for myself. If it's for myself, I'm a little bit sloppier, but these outlines, the outline process doesn't just pertain to the thing itself. It's like, I'm rewriting scripts right now, and I'm kind of better dealing some of the scripts that we already have. And as I'm going through and changing things, I sort of get to a sequence, and I go, oh, they got to get from the top of the valley down into the garrison and through the thing, and here's this whole sequence I have to do. And even for that section, I'll switch out a final draft. I'll go back over to Word, and where I feel like I can make a mess, I guess, and because it's hard to make a mess in Final Draft or screenwriting programs, but I feel like it can be messy in Word. And I go back to Word, and then I'll just vamp for a day, and I'll do an outline of a sequence. You know, I'll outline the sequence, and for me, it's sloppy, loose creation, and then you know, fine work application into the script. It's always that process.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. I'm gonna go with Shilpa M. She had a question earlier about structure and anti-heroes. So if we can unmute, and just a reminder, when you guys unmute, you guys can also show your video as well. Yep. So Shilpa, I think you're on.
Does that work? Oh, hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of your work since the ice skating movie, The Cutting Edge, and all the action and thriller and bigger budget work you've more recently done. So I was wondering, do you have any tips for structuring anti-heroes or building tension in a thriller? Like, is that more what the character wants?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think of it that way. I just, you know, I really don't think of it in terms of they're people. I mean, if you went through all the people that you knew, everyone you'd ever met, would you identify them as anti-heroes or heroes or whatever? They're just the power of the screenwriter or the power of the dramatist is to build up a character that's just real. Movies are about things that go wrong. I've made a living off people that don't get along with each other. I can't write a scene where people are happy. I don't know how to write that scene. I think maybe it's like every now and then I'll stumble across one where like people are getting along, and I'll write the scene and it'll go by and I'll be like, what just happened? I mean, everything for me is in conflict. The best way to get plot out is in really aggressive conflict. So nobody's getting along. Everybody has problems in my stories, but they're real. I never think of them. I wouldn't know how to identify who's an anti-hero, who's a hero, and I wouldn't. How you make tension is just people not getting along and the stakes escalating to the point where what people need and what what people need is in opposition to what's happening, I guess.
Okay, thanks.
Next, we've got Nikhil. He's got a question regarding behavior. So, Nikhil, we can unmute Nikhil and you can share your video as well.
Hey guys, hey Tony, how's it going?
Oh, there you are. Hello.
Hey, I thank you so much for doing this, by the way. Really appreciate it. In your screencraft talk, and I think you mentioned here as well that your key focus these days is behavior. I've studied acting. You know, we talk a lot about even in directing classes. You know, the moment on the waterfront when Marlon Brando is putting on the glove as an example of behavior. But I'd really like to understand that more from your perspective. If I were to ask you, how would you articulate what the qualities of behavior are for one of your characters, say Bourne or Michael Clayton? How would you put that?
I mean, it's just think of, there's two things that astonish me. One is that when people who've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of movies write a script and it doesn't look like any movie you've ever seen. And then when people who go to write characters want to fit them into molds. And if you think of all of the people, I don't know where you're living or who your family is or whatever, just think of the depth and complexity of the things that they need and the things that they're afraid of and the things that they obsess over and the ways that they compensate for that and the ways that they protect themselves and the lies they have told themselves to keep going. I mean, all of those things that are, I think it's, when I was really young, I thought I want to be an artist. And I could already sense, I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm so shitty at this. I'm not gonna, this is all the same. And when I played music, I really, in the end, I was like, I found myself going back to the same things over and over again. I have never I have never begun in 40 years to plumb the limits of what the complexities of the DNA of human behavior, what people are afraid of, what they need, the compound effects of how they live and what they've worked for. And I mean, just think of how complicated everybody you love is. I mean, it's really, that's what I'm talking about. And like, that has to be, there's no reason why you can't bring that level of respect and attention or aspire to that to all of the people that you're reporting about that are in your story. Because that's what you're doing, really. You should be reporting about the people that are in your story.
Thank you. Can I just do a quick follow-up?
Yeah, sure. No.
Do you then ever think about, and I think you mentioned, do you think about archetypes either as a starting point or as a, never? Okay. Thank you so much, Tony. That was really illuminating.
No. Everybody's unique. Who's an archetype? Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for probably one or two more. Let's go with, let's go with Micah.
AKA Shiva.
Aha! Here I am.
Yeah.
So I asked the question about your long takes, and I guess my follow-up question to that is, how do you know your shots need the tempo of a long take?
I mean, it's just, can you, is it worth it to do it there? Is it worth it to go into the Copacabana, and show the whole thing? It's a bravura thing. It's like, is it going to save you time? Is it going to be really worth it? I mean, half of it's fun, half of it's the location, half of it's the thing itself. You have to realize you can't cut around it. You can't change the tempo of it. You are locked into it. You will never be able to change it. And so it's very restrictive in a way. It can be really limiting. You get into a situation where you have a oneer, and it's I'm sure there's been a lot of people that have been stuck in oneers and wish that they could cut them down. Yeah.
All right. Well,
all right.
I'm geeking out that you talked to me. Thank you so much.
Give me 1 second here. Actually, while I look through these questions, Tony, I want to talk to you about writing with partners. I'm not quite sure. I know you've got. Did I lose you? Are you there? Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you obviously have come on to write and fix other scripts. Essentially, have you written with partners many on your work?
I've written with my brother a lot.
Okay.
A lot.
Yeah.
And I mean, I worked with Bo and I've been in a couple little writers' rooms here and there, and I had a little writers' room on the Star Wars thing.
Actually, I'd love to talk about that for a second. Writers' rooms, and obviously you being the boss on Star Wars. What do you look for, when hiring in a writers' room?
I don't know. I never really did it before. To tell you the truth, I had to throw a room together in about 20 minutes. I had no time to throw a room together. It was so desperate. And so, and I'd worked out a lot of what I needed, and I had very little time. So I literally just picked up the phone and I grabbed Bo and Danny to come in and help me out. So instead of doing an 11-week writers room, we did a 5-day writers room.
Oh wow!
But I knew them, and I'd played. It's sort of like playing tennis with them before. I couldn't. There was no time for me to explore or do anything. It was really an emergency, and so I don't really know. I think it's kind of cool. I think. Look, I think that's a really good message I think it's kind of a good way to round out too, because everybody thinks that, and I've said this before, but I really think it's true. When I was young, I really thought that everybody was against me, and that nobody would read your shit, and I even had I had some access, not that it really made that much difference, but access to people, but you still feel like, wow, nobody cares about me, no one's going to read my stuff, everybody's against me, and you work and work and work, and nobody cares, and I'm young, and it really felt and I'd come out of music into this, so it was doubly over that. I really felt like the world was against me. And what I didn't really realize until much later on is that the world is really yearning for you to be successful. The world really wants to discover young talent. The world really wants to, like, oh my God, look, you're a freaking, amazing. Everybody wants to find that thing. So I haven't had that experience yet of building the room. I've been around a lot of friends of mine have done that, and since all the stuff, since we fired all of our agents and everything, and all the stuff that's happened in the last year, I've seen a lot of that happen, and I've talked to a lot of people about how tough it is, but also how exciting it is to be finding people. So I think that's God, I can't. What was the beginning of the?
it was working with partners and whatnot, but I think that is.
Yeah, no, I mean working with other people. I've never sat in a room and written with anybody else. Even Danny and I, as close as we are, we'll go back and forth. And you write a draft, I'll write a draft, or you write a scene, and I'll write a scene. I've spitballed many films with all kinds of people, and that I love to do, and that's what the writers' room is like. And I've had the chance to do that with some of the best. And that's a gas, and I love doing that.
Awesome. And then and you just touched upon something that I really wanted to talk about, was the whole entire WGA, and talks. Just wanted to see, what your thoughts are on where everything's at. I mean, we're negotiations continue to happen. Wanted to see what your take is.
Well, there's two separate things going on. I mean, the NBA negotiations now are happening. That's a real serious thing. That's how we get paid. That's the thing you go on strike for. That's the real serious negotiations for the with the AMPTP have begun now.
Yeah.
The issue with the agencies is now a year old, and in many ways is quite honestly, just because everybody's found workarounds, is settled law, really, in a way. I haven't had an agent. I left my agency a long time ago, and there's times there's things that are not better about it whatsoever. I've had things this week where I really wish I had an agent, but in general, it's worked out. And for a lot of people, it's worked out. And there are more writers working now than have ever worked before. Every job is full. So anybody who's not working is not working for, there may be other reasons, or it's just a different version of musical chairs at that point. But there are more writers working than ever before. Every job is being filled. And for writers in my general economic vicinity, whatever, there's all kinds of workarounds, whether they have managers or I just want them to have a lawyer, and you use the phone a lot more. There's a lot of ways to get around it. I think that will finally be resolved pretty soon. I think the big agencies are really folding in a way. I mean, WME is folding up. I think you're seeing all the lit agents are leaving and joining management firms. I think all it's going to take really is for one lit agent to go out and form a really great lit agency, and you'd see a lot of really top screenwriters join there immediately. I think everybody's been waiting for that. The labor issues, I don't know how that's going to go. This is a very weird time to be doing that. We're at a very critical point with the streaming thing. Our whole business is changing. Everyone on this call is fully aware of how and why they're watching everything the way they're watching, and everyone's watching how the business is changing. And I wish we weren't negotiating under the COVID. I wish it wasn't a COVID negotiation at this point, but it's because it's a very important negotiation. I don't know how that's going. The one with the agency, I think, is settled law pretty much at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. This has been really great. This conversation has been really, really great. It's been incredibly valuable for all of us. So, Tony, thank you so much again for taking the time out. Really means a lot. And I know you made me chase you, but I'm glad I did. This was great. So thanks
COVID
again.
with Corona was good for you. Yes, exactly. I have nowhere to go. I got nothing to do. No,
Yeah,
exactly. Anyway, it was lovely meeting everyone without meeting everybody. It's such a drag to have an audience of just names just flashing by here. Wow.
I know. Just a reminder to our audience. So next week we've got Grinda Chadda. She's a BAFTA and Golden Globe nominated writer-director. Bend It Like Beckham, Blinded by the Light. And the week after, we got Richie Mehta, who is he's written and directed Deadly Crime for Netflix. So we're looking forward for everyone joining that. Tony, once again, I'll let you go, but thanks again so much, man. Really, really appreciate this.
My pleasure. All right. Best of luck to everybody. Thank you.